No one expected Katie Couric to lose her composure on live television. But that was before Jasmine Crockett walked onto the stage. Before Jasmine sat down across from Katie in that cold, glass-walled studio in Manhattan and looked her straight in the eye, like she already knew what was coming. The lights were bright enough to sting. The cameras were rolling for a primetime segment that was supposed to be about civility in public discourse. But it took exactly 2 questions for the air to crack open like a fault line. Katie leaned forward in her chair, her voice smooth, her smile practiced. "Congresswoman Crockett," she began, "some critics say your approach is too combative, too emotional. Do you think it's because you struggle to separate your identity from your politics?" Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't shift. For a beat, she didn't even breathe. Because in that moment, she understood, Katie wasn't just asking if Jasmine was too passionate. She was asking if Jasmine was too black. The tension was so sudden that even the production assistant by the teleprompter swallowed hard. Jasmine tilted her head a fraction of an inch, and her voice came out low and precise. "You want to rephrase that?" she asked, though she already knew Katie wouldn't. Katie hesitated, just long enough for everyone watching to realize she'd stepped over a line she didn't even see. "I'm simply saying," Katie continued, her tone edged with that brand of condescension that passes for politeness, that sometimes your background can cloud your objectivity. A hush fell. Someone backstage turned to the audio engineer and mouthed, "Is she serious?" And Jasmine, still calm, still unblinking, leaned in just close enough that her mic picked up every word. "My background doesn't cloud my objectivity," she said evenly. "It's the reason I fight as hard as I do." Millions of viewers sat up straighter. Because they knew something had just shifted. And they were right, this was only the beginning. Katie's practiced expression faltered, just enough for the audience to catch it. A flicker of something she couldn't hide. Irritation? Embarrassment? Maybe both. Jasmine didn't move. She kept her gaze fixed, steady, unblinking. It was the look of someone who'd spent her entire life being told to temper her tone, smooth her edges, shrink herself into something softer, safer. And she was done pretending. Katie cleared her throat, her cue cards trembling a fraction in her hand. "Congresswoman," she tried again, her voice tightening, "my question isn't about your race. It's about whether your personal experiences, your upbringing, make you too biased to see both sides." Jasmine's mouth curved into the faintest, coldest smile. "You mean whether growing up in a neighborhood you'd never dare set foot in disqualifies me from having a seat at this table?" A beat of silence. Then Jasmine spoke again, her voice low enough to make the room lean in. "Let me tell you something about bias," she said. "Bias is inviting a black woman onto your show and deciding before she opens her mouth that she's too emotional to be credible. Bias is framing every argument I make as an overreaction, when all I'm doing is describing reality you don't have to live." Katie's lips parted. But Jasmine wasn't finished. "You want to call this a conversation about civility," Jasmine went on. "Fine. But civility without honesty isn't civility at all. It's performance." In the control booth, the producer was whispering frantically into his headset. "Keep rolling, don't cut away. Because this moment right here, was what people would be talking about tomorrow." Katie tried to recover her composure, tried to shift the ground under Jasmine's feet. "If you feel so strongly," she said, her voice rising just a little, "why don't you tell America exactly what you think I'm doing right now?" Jasmine's eyes never left hers. "I think you're using your platform to remind me, and every person watching, that no matter how hard we work, no matter how much we achieve, you still think you have the right to question whether we belong here." The audience watching at home didn't breathe. Because they knew, Jasmine hadn't just called Katie out. She'd called out an entire system that made this moment possible. And she wasn't done yet. Jasmine let the silence stretch, just long enough for every person in the studio, and every viewer at home, to feel it clamp down on their chest. Katie shifted in her chair, her carefully constructed facade cracking at the edges. "You can't seriously believe," she said, her voice thin now, "that this entire network has some agenda against you. Against people who look like you. Jasmine's eyebrows rose a fraction, and her voice stayed calm, almost gentle. I don't have to believe it, she replied evenly. I've watched the clips. I've read the headlines. I've seen how many times you all use the words angry, aggressive, or radical when a black woman has the nerve to speak with conviction. Katie glanced at her producer off camera, looking for rescue. None came. And you know what? Jasmine continued, her tone sharpening, I'm not here to make you comfortable. I'm not here to water down what I know is true. The audience was so still you could hear a microphone hum. Katie tried to pivot, tried to regain control. I think our viewers would say they respect hard work and achievement, she said, her chin lifting as if daring Jasmine to contradict her. But Jasmine didn't flinch. And yet, she said quietly, you spent the first 10 minutes of this segment listing everything I overcame, like my success is surprising. Like it's a fluke. Katie's mouth opened, but Jasmine was already leaning forward, her voice dropping to that measured, dangerous softness that made headlines. Here's what you won't say out loud. You think people like me need your validation to be legitimate. The control room was whispering again. Producers with palms pressed to their headsets, counting the seconds until a commercial break. But no one dared cut away. Jasmine's next words landed like a strike. You invited me here to talk about policy, she said. Instead, you've tried to turn this into a spectacle. A trial to see whether I'm worthy of the chair I'm sitting in. She paused, her gaze locked with Katie's. And the answer, Katie, is that I don't need your permission to belong. Somewhere in America, millions of people exhaled all at once. Katie's smile was gone. She looked like someone who'd just realized the script she'd rehearsed for weeks had burned up in real time. Jasmine sat back, not smug, not even satisfied, just certain. Her certainty was what made it so hard to look away. All this, Jasmine gestured around the studio, the lights, the cameras, the audience, is designed to make people like me feel small. To corner me into defending my existence instead of defending my ideas. Katie swallowed. I'm just doing my job. No, Jasmine interrupted, voice soft but unyielding. You're doing your version of your job. And I'm doing mine. The tension radiated from every screen in America. You could feel it through your phone, feel it in your chest. The comment sections were already on fire, clips already being chopped and shared. Katie tried again, voice brittle. I'm sorry if you feel that way. Jasmine tilted her head, her expression somewhere between pity and defiance. That's not an apology, she said evenly. That's an attempt to put the burden back on me. Katie's producer finally spoke into her earpiece. She blinked, then announced, we're going to take a quick break. But Jasmine raised a hand. One more thing, she said. The director hesitated. The countdown to commercial was frozen. Jasmine leaned in just enough for her voice to carry everywhere. I'm not here to convince you of my worth. I'm here to remind every black girl watching this that they don't have to shrink to fit into someone else's narrative. And with that, she folded her hands, ready to let the cameras cut. It was only later, hours after the broadcast ended, that people began to understand they'd just witnessed something bigger than an argument. The network tried to pivot. They uploaded the interview online with a bland caption, a spirited discussion about identity and media. But the public wasn't buying it. By dawn, Jasmine's words had been clipped, subtitled, and posted by thousands. The line about black girls not shrinking had become a rallying cry. Katie's team scrambled. They issued a statement saying she was committed to inclusive dialogue. But no one was quoting that. They were quoting Jasmine. That afternoon, Jasmine walked into a small community center on the south side of Dallas. No cameras this time, just folding chairs, a table with a stained coffee pot, and 40 women waiting to hear her speak. One of them, a college student with box braids and a nervous smile, raised her hand. How do you stay calm when people try to bait you? Jasmine didn't answer right away. She looked at the floor for a moment, remembering. When I was 16, she began, I worked the register at a grocery store. One day, this man came in and called me every name you can imagine. Said I was worthless, said my family probably lived off food stamps. She lifted her gaze. And you know what I learned that day? His rage wasn't about me. It was about his fear that someone like me could exist outside the box he'd built. The room was silent, everyone leaning forward. So when Katie tried to frame me as an angry black woman, it wasn't new, Jasmine continued. It was just familiar. And I refused to play my assigned role. One woman in the back whispered, "Amen." Jasmine's phone buzzed, messages from people she'd never met, thanking her for speaking up. But in the middle of all that praise, she felt something deeper, a responsibility. Because this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of a much bigger fight. By evening, the clip had climbed to 10 million views. It wasn't just activists or journalists sharing it, teachers, nurses, teenagers, even veterans were posting Jasmine's words. Katie Couric's name trended alongside hashtags like #RespectBlackWomen and #MediaAccountability. Inside her Manhattan apartment, Katie sat cross-legged on the couch, laptop open, reading comments. Some defended her. Many didn't. Her producer called. "You need to apologize. Properly." Katie rubbed her forehead. She'd spent decades building a reputation for poise. But tonight, none of it mattered. One moment of bias, spoken or implied, had rewritten her legacy in real time. Meanwhile, Jasmine wasn't celebrating. She was on a late flight back to Texas, her phone face down in her lap. Her aide, Tasha, leaned over. "You okay?" Jasmine nodded, but her jaw was tight. "It's not that she underestimated me," she said finally. "It's that she expected me to be grateful for the chance to sit at her table." Tasha let out a slow exhale. "What are you going to do?" Jasmine turned her head toward the window, watching the city lights fade into darkness. "Remind her, and everyone else, whose table this really is." By the time Jasmine landed in Dallas, reporters were already staking out the terminal. Microphones flashed as she stepped off the jet bridge, her expression composed but unreadable. A young journalist in a blue windbreaker leaned forward. "Congresswoman," Katie Couric's team released a statement. "They're calling it a misunderstanding, and she says she's deeply saddened by the perception of bias. Do you have a response?" Jasmine paused, adjusting her tote on her shoulder. She looked the reporter straight in the eye. "You can call it a misunderstanding if it makes you feel better," she said evenly. "But a pattern isn't a misunderstanding. It's a choice." That sentence ricocheted across social media before she'd even reached her car. In the back seat, Jasmine finally let herself breathe. She thought about all the quiet rooms she'd sat in, the conferences, the roundtables, where someone smiled while telling her she didn't belong. And how many times she'd swallowed it to keep the peace. But this time, she hadn't swallowed anything. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "You spoke your truth. That's all you can do." Jasmine typed back, "It doesn't feel like enough." "It is," her mother replied. "And it always has been." That was the part Katie didn't understand. Respect wasn't something you owed to someone just because they were famous. Respect had to be earned. And Jasmine wasn't in the business of pretending otherwise. By morning, editorial boards were weighing in. Some praised Jasmine for standing firm. Others accused her of overreacting. The usual divide. But none of it changed the fact that millions had heard her speak, unflinching, about what it meant to be dismissed because of your skin, your voice, your very presence. And once you've heard that truth, you can't unhear it. By Wednesday, it wasn't just the networks dissecting the footage, it was everyday people. At kitchen tables, in break rooms, in late-night group chats. A clip of Jasmine's response was now the top trending video across multiple platforms, paired with captions like, "She didn't flinch. Say it louder for the people in the back. This is how you end the gaslighting. In a modest cafe in Minneapolis, a group of college students huddled around a cracked iPad, replaying the moment over and over. One young woman wiped her eyes. "My mom went through the same thing at her job," she whispered. Nobody ever believed her. Meanwhile, in a newsroom in New York, Katie Couric was watching her own legacy being debated in real time. Every channel had the split screen, Katie's polished studio image frozen on one side, Jasmine's calm, resolute face on the other. And in between, a question neither woman could fully control: what happens when the person you try to undermine doesn't shrink, but rises? Katie's press team scrambled to reframe the narrative. Another statement was drafted, more carefully worded, this time. It acknowledged the deep hurt caused, and offered a vague commitment to listening and learning. But Jasmine knew what that meant. She'd seen it before, the cycle of offense, denial, apology, repeat. The hollow scripts that fixed nothing. So when a CNN producer called to offer her airtime, Jasmine hesitated. Then she said yes. The next night, she sat across from the anchor, hands folded, voice clear. "I'm not here to cancel anyone," she said. "But I'm also not here to protect anyone's comfort at the cost of my dignity. If telling the truth about what happened makes people uncomfortable, that's something for them to sit with." There was no anger in her tone, just certainty. A certainty that made the anchor look briefly unsteady. Back in Dallas, a local radio caller summed it up best. She didn't have to shout. She didn't have to get ugly. She just stood her ground, and that was enough to shake the whole building. On Thursday morning, Jasmine's phone was still buzzing with messages, some supportive, some furious, some just stunned. She scrolled past them, pausing only when she saw a text from her mother. "I'm proud of you. You didn't let her make you small." That one, she saved. By mid-afternoon, the media narrative was officially out of Katie's hands. A leaked email from a producer revealed that the segment had been flagged internally weeks before as potentially problematic. The phrase sparked a fresh storm online. People were tired of polite euphemisms for something uglier, the quiet, smirking prejudice that never quite leaves the room. That evening, Jasmine agreed to appear on a live stream with 3 other black women in media. The chat had been scheduled last minute, but it exploded in viewership. Nearly 1 million people tuned in as they spoke about the patterns behind Katie's comments. One panelist, a veteran journalist, said, "This isn't about one anchor. It's about a system that decides who gets to be credible and who gets called angry." Jasmine nodded. She didn't interrupt. When her turn came, she spoke low and even. "I'm tired of seeing black women expected to absorb ignorance and smile through it," she said. "We shouldn't have to become expert contortionists just to be heard." The chat box lit up, hearts, raised fists, messages of gratitude. Meanwhile, Katie's team released a video statement. She sat in a pristine living room, hands folded, eyes solemn. She called her words careless, said she was learning. But her voice quivered in a way that made it feel less like contrition and more like resentment. People noticed. By Friday, late-night comedians were riffing on it. One quipped, "Turns out, when you try to question a black woman's qualifications on live TV, you'd better have your own resume in order." The audience roared. But behind the laughter was a harder truth: this wasn't going away. Katie had underestimated her. And Jasmine? She was done playing small. Saturday dawned with the air buzzing. Jasmine Crockett's clip had been viewed over 30 million times across platforms. But it wasn't just the numbers. It was the way people were talking about it, in classrooms, offices, living rooms, barbershops. The way they were using her words as a reference point, a line in the sand. That morning, Jasmine sat in her modest kitchen with a mug of coffee she'd microwaved twice. She stared out the window at the street below, her mind surprisingly quiet. For all the noise outside, she felt something close to peace. Later, she agreed to one interview, a national morning show that had tried all week to book her. When the host asked if she'd ever considered that her response might be perceived as too confrontational, Jasmine didn't blink. "If telling the truth feels confrontational," she said calmly, "maybe that tells you more about the listener than the speaker." It wasn't scripted. It was just honest. The producer in the control room mouthed, "Wow." Meanwhile, Katie's network was scrambling. Advertisers were pulling spots. Old clips were resurfacing. The scrutiny wasn't just about one incident, it was about a culture that let it fester. Back in Jasmine's district office, an intern taped a simple sign to the front desk. "You belong here." No logo. No slogan. Just that. By the end of the day, a dozen volunteers had shown up, offering to help with housing casework or voter outreach. They didn't say much about the viral moment. They just wanted to be part of something that felt real. And that was the point. This wasn't about punishing Katie Couric. It wasn't about viral fame. It was about a deeper shift, one Jasmine could feel humming under her skin. People were done pretending. They were done letting their voices be framed as divisive, when all they were doing was telling the truth. They were done smiling politely while someone questioned their belonging. In that moment, Jasmine realized her role was never just about policy. It was about reminding people that their stories mattered, and that speaking up didn't have to cost them their dignity. It could be the very thing that restored it. Sometimes, the most powerful moments don't come from shouting or grandstanding. They come from a steady voice telling a truth everyone else was too afraid to say. Jasmine didn't plan to go viral. She didn't rehearse a takedown or craft a perfect soundbite. She simply refused to let Katie Couric's words define her, or anyone like her. And in doing so, she reminded millions of people watching that dignity isn't something you're given by a host behind a desk. It's something you claim when you decide you've had enough. So if you ever find yourself in a room where someone tries to shrink your worth, remember this moment. You don't have to yell to make it clear who you are. Sometimes, the quietest truths hit the hardest.